Now, as we've been talking about today, very excited to get the news that there's going to be an exhibition at Biggin Memorial Museum, which will be concentrating on the incredible and crucial role that the Air Transport Auxiliary played during the Battle of Britain. Now, if you've never heard of the Air Transport Auxiliary before, the ATA, mostly female pilots, and they moved aircraft from supermarine factories right around the UK throughout World War II. And like I say, they're finally being celebrated. Now, one of those pilots, the youngest of all of the pilots, was an aviator called Jackie Moggridge, and I'm delighted to catch up with her daughter, Candy, again. How are you today, Candy?
Oh, yes, very well on this beautiful day.
It's so nice to hear your voice again. It's been ages.
Yes, I know.
Well, Candy, first of all, let's start by talking about your incredible mum. Now, your mum was the youngest ATA pilot. So tell me a little bit about the start of her career.
Well, she learned to fly in South Africa because she had two very boisterous brothers and they called her a sissy. So she said, I'm going to be a pilot just to show them. And so she ended up learning to fly and got her pilot's license. She was the first girl to do a parachute jump in South Africa, always the adventurer. And then she met Doreen Hooper, who was the first woman commercial pilot license. And she thought, I can do that. So she had to right away to England to join the college there. And she got into Whitney Aeronautical College, Oxford. And she came over, age 18, to learn to be a commercial pilot, only girl in the whole place. And then 1 year in, war broke out. So she thought, right, I'm going to join the RAF. And she applied to the RAF, all excited. I've got her diaries. And she said, I can't wait to hear. Her mum said, you're coming home. There's going to be a war. And they replied and said, no, we don't take women pilots in the RAF. So she was desperately disappointed and she joined the WAF. But unbeknown to her was an association called the Air Transport Auxiliary, which was started to take planes from the factories to the waiting airmen. And they had the men that couldn't actually be fighter pilots anymore because they were too old or they weren't physically able anymore, but they could fly. And they ended up being termed ancient and tattered airmen, but they ran out of them. So they thought, oh, we'll even use women. And that was my mum's chance. Pauline Gower, she was the head of the women. She got them in there. And after the first 8, who proved they could fly the biplanes, the Tiger Moths, because they weren't allowed to fly anything else just then, because we were women after all, then they realised actually with Pauline's promotion of them that they could fly anything. And my mum joined in 1940. And she got to fly every type of warplane, 82 different types she flew.
Oh my goodness me. I mean, yeah. We've spoken at length about the incredible career of your mum, from parachute jumping to being a radar operative to King's Commendation, Queen's Coronation Medal, through to being one of 5 women in the 50s who managed to pass the rigorous testing to gain her RAF wings. Now,
until they stopped women doing such things. So.
Exactly. But Candy, when you look back at your mum's incredible career, can you think of a highlight that has inspired you?
Well, I did talks on her, and I started doing a PowerPoint with all her things she'd done, all her firsts, the parachute jump and the ATA flying and the going through the sound barrier and then being the first woman airline captain. And I looked at them all, and the more I added, getting her RAF wings, I had to make the print smaller. And I think it was then that I suddenly realised, oh my goodness, if I'd done any one of those things, I'd be proud. And she did all of those things. So that's what made me really, but of course she had died by then, and I could have asked her so many more questions. But luckily she was a hoarder, and I've got all her photos and her letters and her little diaries when she was young. And so I started looking more into it, and these wonderful women like Joy Lofthouse and Lettice Curtis and Joan Hughes, and that's when I realised they were all of an ilk. They were all truly adventurous, truly dedicated to their job, loved flying, had an absolute joy of flying in them. And they took it very seriously and were very proud that they were doing this job, and they did feel important. But of course, it was dangerous because some of the planes didn't work. You know, they called it the graveyard run because they'd have to take a plane back to be scrapped, and it would have a note attached. Flaps don't work, you know, things like that. And my mum's landed a few planes without the undercarriage going down. They were very careful because otherwise they thought they might be just termed, woman pilots, and then they wouldn't let women fly anymore. So,
I mean, Candy, when we met at Joy Lofthouse's funeral, this is many moons ago now, and I remember chatting away with you and swapping these stories that we've been so fortunate to be the caretakers of. What do you think it was about these women that just made them so brave and so extraordinary?
I think they had a wonderful sense of adventure. Even when we went, they had that backbone too that I think everyone had in the war, and especially the women. You know, that make, do, and mend. They just get on. They don't complain. But they had a real sense of adventure, and they were really thrilled to be thrown into a man's world, which they'd never had the chance to do. And unless, because of the war, they were managed to actually fly all these planes, or allowed to fly all these planes. And Pauline Gower actually got them equal pay.
Yes, yeah.
So that was amazing, because it all went again after the war. But it was. I think they had a lot of trouble, you know, sort of prejudice against a woman flying, but they were determined to plough through all that, and they did it with humour lots of the time.
Yes.
And in fact, my mother had a lovely story that she was the gaggle of girls came. They called it a gaggle of planes when they came in together, and I always think of it like a gaggle of girls. And these lovely three girls landed their planes, and out they got, all three of them, all three women. And the commandant came along and said, okay, as I said, sometimes they didn't work. One of the girls' flaps hadn't worked on landing. They didn't work. And he came in and said, well, which one of you silly girls forgot to use their flaps? And my mother looked at the other girl who'd done it, and she said, flaps, what are those? And the other girl went, oh, Jackie, I think it's that little lever on the left. And the chap next to the commandant said, I think they're joking with you, sir. Because that's the sort of thing that sometimes they got.
Oh, I love that. That's brilliant. That's just great comedy, isn't it? And they were just full of incredible stories. Now, let's talk about this new exhibition at Biggin Hill to celebrate the Air Transport Auxiliary. Incredible people like your mum.
I'm excited about that.
So what can we expect then, Candy?
Well, they're going to, Katie Edwards is organising it all. She's coordinated it all at Biggin Hill, and she's got my mother's uniform. She's got the little ATA ferry pilot's notes, which was the only thing that they could fly with, because they were, you know, single cockpits like Spitfires and many of the planes, they hadn't actually been up in them had a lesson in them. So they were given ferry pilot instruction, and then ferry pilot's notes, which is one card per page per plane, and a little ring binder on the back. They slotted it into their boot. So they had takeoff speeds, landing speeds, all the things they needed to actually fly the plane. And sometimes 5 different planes a day. And I've got my mother's original one, which has now no longer got the nice ring binder. It's tied up with a bit of string, and it's all falling apart, and it's got her little notes against each plane in it. So that will be there. Her logbooks, she's got 6 logbooks, and when you look at those, you realise what they flew, and how many planes they flew a day, and you know, the day started at dawn and ended when it got dark, when you couldn't fly anymore. And then they had to get the train back or whatever. Amy Johnson, of course, she used to do the Anson, and she'd do some of the pickups, and so they didn't have to get the train then. She'd come along and pick them up. But they had to lug these heavy parachutes wherever they went. And sometimes, of course, it was bitterly cold. My mother always said, bitterly cold in some of these planes. Absolutely freezing up there. She used to sing all the way. And, of course, they had no radio contact with the ground. So, you know, they were meant to not fly if it was cloudy, but English weather would come down while they were up there, which is what happened to Amy, of course. And then they'd have some barrage balloons would go up, and they were meant to know where the barrage balloons were going up. But, you know, suddenly there'd be an air raid, barrage balloons would go up, and they'd suddenly find they're trying to land, barrage balloons coming up. It was quite hair-raising and tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite dangerous. And this is something that will be explored with the exhibition. Now, your mum, before, she passed away, she wrote a book, Spitfire Girl, My Life in the Sky, by Jackie Moggridge. So tell me a little bit about this read. Is it document everything that she's done in her career as an aviator?
It takes her from the beginning right through to the ATA, to the RAF, voluntary reserves, which she joined after the war, and to her flying adventures of the Spitfires to Burma, which were the Israelis sold 30 Spitfires to Burma, and 3 men and just herself took these 30 Spitfires. 9 stops on the way. That's quite adventurous as well, because of course the danger of flying between Iraq and Iran over the desert, and they had to land. But I'm not going to tell you what happens because that's in the book. But yes, lots of ATA, lots of writing about, and in the RAF doing her wings course, lots of planes, but mostly absolutely an adventure story. She wrote it in 1957, so it's the facts. And in fact, the Imperial War Museum has put it in a time capsule because they said, being an autobiography, being written just after the war, not when she was 90 and someone wrote it for her and the memories are old. She wrote it then and there, and they said it will be, and it's an amazing social history, and people in years to come won't believe what these women did or weren't allowed to do, and the difficulty of getting to do the job she did. They wouldn't believe it even happened.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's so important that we, like I say, as the caretakers of these stories, we talk about it. And Candy, it is an absolute pleasure to catch up with you. I know that this exhibition is something that you're going to visit and go along.
The launch of it, yes. I'm going to give a talk there. And I think it's so good to get these stories out there, because they are not written in the history books. They are not. They've been airbrushed out because they were women. They were just women. It wasn't counted. They weren't even allowed to be promoted in the war. It wasn't allowed. Well, they were women. They weren't allowed to be promoted. So it's so important that these stories are acknowledged now, and they are acknowledged beautifully now by RAF Museum, etc. And I think because women are now in these places, running them now, they're actually bringing these stories out, and it's fabulous.
Absolutely right. What an absolute pleasure to catch up with you today, Candy. The incredible story of Jackie Moggridge. You can hear more about that if you go along to the Biggin Hill Memorial Museum and celebrate the crucial role that the Air Transport Auxiliary played in the Battle of Britain. But Candy, for now, we'll say thank you so much. A real pleasure to catch up with you again.
Thank you, Amy.